It was supposed to be just another quiet night, the kind of night where the world forgets cemeteries even exist. Rain tapped lightly against the tin roof of the maintenance shed, thunder rolled far off in the hills, and the faint orange glow of St. Mary's Cemetery's lamps flickered across rows of marble stones. I'd worked that night shift 100 times before, alone, content in the silence. But silence, I've learned, has a way of listening back. My name is David Miller. I've been a cemetery groundskeeper for over 20 years. Death doesn't scare me anymore. Not the smell of the earth, not the sight of freshly dug graves, not even the occasional sound of wind whistling through empty vases. But that night, the night the silence broke, I heard something that still haunts me. I remember locking up the tool shed just before midnight. The storm was beginning to swell. I took my flashlight and started my rounds. The same route I'd walked every night for years. The path behind the old mausoleum always felt colder, even in summer. That night, it was bitter. The kind of cold that clings to your lungs, and that's when I heard it. A faint sound, muffled, like crying. At first I thought it was an animal. A stray dog, maybe, trapped near the drainage pit that always flooded in the rain. I swung my flashlight toward the noise, but the beam only caught sheets of falling water and the glint of wet stone. The crying stopped. I stood there, frozen, trying to listen past the rain. Nothing, just the low hum of the storm. I shook my head, muttered something about sleep deprivation, and started walking again. Then it started again, clearer this time. Not an animal, not the wind. A human voice, faint but distinct, trembling through the ground. I felt every hair on my body rise. My throat went dry as I followed the sound across the newer section. The fresh graves. The flashlight trembled in my hand. The sound grew sharper, more desperate, like someone gasping through tears. I stopped at the edge of a grave marked Rachel Turner, 1993 to 2022. The flowers on top were still fresh. Mud streaked the petals where rain had washed the soil loose. I crouched down, trying to steady my breathing. For a moment, everything went still. Even the rain seemed to hesitate, and then it came again, a single muffled sob. From beneath me, my legs went weak. Logic screamed that it was impossible. The dead don't cry. Maybe air pockets were shifting beneath the soil. That happened sometimes after heavy rain. Maybe water was draining through the ground, making strange noises. But none of those explanations matched what I was hearing. I pressed my ear to the wet earth, heart hammering against my ribs. The sound was unmistakable now. A choked human sob, faint but pleading. I jerked back, stumbling into the grass. My flashlight slipped, clattering against a headstone. The beam rolled over the grave marker again, and that's when I saw it. A thin crack in the soil. Something inside me shifted then. The rational part of my brain giving way to raw instinct. Every bit of training told me to call the supervisor, to log it, to wait for confirmation. But another part, the part that had learned to listen to silence, told me something different. Someone, or something, was down there. And it was calling for help. People always imagined cemetery work as something morbid, the kind of job that would hollow a man out. But for me, it was peace. I started at St. Mary's right after my divorce, when I was 40, and looking for a way to quiet my head. 20 years later, I'd grown to love the rhythm of the place. The routine, the stillness, the predictability of it all. Most days started before sunrise. I'd unlock the gates, walk the perimeter, check for vandalism or fallen branches. Then I'd mow the grass between headstones, wash the bird droppings off memorials, replace wilted flowers. Funerals were the only times the cemetery truly felt alive. The murmur of prayer, the muffled sobs, the sound of shovels scraping dirt. After that, silence would reclaim everything again. Death, I learned, is orderly. The living are the ones who make chaos. Old Joe, my mentor when I started, used to say, "Graves don't scare you. It's the stories they hold that do." Back then, I thought it was just something poetic he told new hires to make the job sound noble. But years later, I understood. Every name on a stone once had a laugh, a heartbeat, a favorite song. Out here, surrounded by reminders of endings, you start to listen differently. You start to feel the space between what's gone and what remains. I never married again. The cemetery became my company. Some nights, I'd sit under the oak by the north grounds, the oldest section, and just think about how strange it was that the world keeps moving while so much of it is buried right beneath our feet. That part of the cemetery, the north grounds, had been closed off for years. The soil had gone soft, unstable from old flooding. We weren't supposed to dig there anymore. But about 2 weeks before that stormy night, the church made an exception. A young woman's family had requested burial there, right beside her grandparents. Her name was Rachel Turner, 29 years old, died in a car crash on Highway 12. I didn't know her, of course, but her funeral had stayed with me. There was something about the way her mother clung to the casket, whispering she wasn't ready. The priest had said something odd, too. May she finally find peace. Words that usually feel comforting had landed strangely heavy that day, after the burial. I'd stayed behind longer than usual, making sure the soil was settled, checking for water pooling near the headstone. Everything looked fine. Just another burial. Another chapter closed. But now, thinking back, I can't shake the feeling that maybe it wasn't. Everything about that night, the storm, the silence, the sound, started with Rachel Turner's grave. And no matter how I tried to reason it, something deep down told me that whatever I'd heard, it wasn't the wind. It wasn't the rain. It was her. Rachel Turner's funeral had been one of those gray afternoons that already felt drenched in sorrow before the rain even came. Families gathered under umbrellas, faces blurred by the mist. The priest's voice cracked through the drizzle, a thin thread of faith against the inevitable. I remember the casket, pale oak, polished until it gleamed like glass. Closed, her mother had insisted. "I can't see her like that," she'd said through trembling lips. That day I'd stood near the back with the other groundsmen, hands clasped behind me, the way we're taught, unobtrusive, invisible. But something about that service wouldn't leave me. It wasn't the grief. I'd seen that countless times. It was the way her mother kept whispering that same phrase over and over. She wasn't ready. It lingered in my mind as I worked through the following week. Her grave was in the new section, right at the edge where the old ground started to slope. We'd reinforced the area a dozen times, but heavy rain could still cause the earth to settle unevenly. I checked it twice after the burial. The soil had compacted just fine. Nothing out of place. Then came that storm. The wind arrived in long, howling waves, rattling the metal gates and slamming branches against headstones. By the time I made my rounds that night, the lamps along the southern path were flickering in and out, half their bulbs drowned by rainwater. I tightened my coat, kept my flashlight high, and followed the gravel path past the chapel, toward the Turner grave. It was instinct more than plan, something pulling me there. When I reached it, the first thing I noticed was the soil. It looked disturbed, not from runoff or erosion, but moved, as if something had shifted from underneath. I crouched down, running my glove across the surface. It was softer than the rest, even though the rain had hit everything equally. Then came the sound. Faint, but there. At first, it was like hearing through water. Muffled, uneven, broken by the rhythm of the rain. But when I leaned closer, my stomach dropped. It wasn't just sound. It was a voice. I stumbled back, the flashlight beam shaking. I told myself it had to be the storm echoing through the drainage. Or maybe air pockets collapsing under the pressure of wet soil. That happens, right? It happens. But my breath caught as the voice returned. Softer this time. Clearer. Help. I froze. The word was barely a whisper, but it carried through the rain like a scream. I radioed the office immediately. Static. Tried again. Nothing but crackle. The storm must have taken down the line. I looked around, desperate for any sign of someone else, but the cemetery was empty. It was just me, the graves, and that sound. I knelt again, closer this time, pressing my hand against the cold, wet ground. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is anyone there?" The rain eased for just a second, long enough for silence to stretch out like breath between us. Then softly, impossibly, the reply came again. "Help. Me." And that was when I knew something was terribly wrong. For a long moment, I just stood there, drenched, shaking, unable to breathe. The flashlight beam quivered over the grave marker, over the flowers now matted into the mud. My mind fought itself, logic against instinct. It's impossible. You buried her. She's gone. And yet, that voice, it hadn't sounded like imagination. It had sounded alive. Training told me to stop, to wait until morning, to call the sheriff or the funeral director. But conscience doesn't wait for morning. What if someone had been buried alive? What if there'd been a mistake? The thought dug itself into my chest like a blade. Before I realized it, I was running back to the maintenance shed, fumbling through keys, pulling out a shovel and a pry bar. The rain was heavier now, thunder cracking so close it rattled my ribs. Each step back toward the grave felt slower, heavier, like the ground itself didn't want me to return. When I reached Rachel's plot, again I hesitated. My flashlight was dying, its beam fading to a dull cone of yellow. The grave looked darker than before, the soil slick and glistening. The sound was gone. No crying, no voice, just the storm, but something in me couldn't walk away. I thrust the shovel into the earth. The mud was heavy, clinging to the blade like tar. Each scoop released the smell of wet clay and something faintly metallic. My arms burned. My breath came in short, harsh bursts. I told myself over and over that I was doing the right thing. That even if I was wrong, at least I'd know. Lightning flashed across the cemetery, bleaching everything in white for a second. And in that moment, I could see the outline of the coffin through the thinning soil. Pale wood, slick with rain. I dropped to my knees, digging with my hands now, clawing at the mud until my fingernails split. Then, silence. The wind stilled. The rain softened to a drizzle. I leaned over the coffin, chest heaving, waiting. Nothing. I forced myself to move. One latch. Two. My fingers slipped, trembling, the metal cold and stubborn. I muttered a prayer I didn't know I remembered. Then I lifted the lid. For a second I thought I was looking into nothing at all. The coffin was empty. No body, no lining disturbed. Nothing, except for the smell. Damp, earthy, and faintly sweet like decaying flowers. My brain refused to process it. Then the flashlight beam caught something. The satin interior wasn't smooth anymore. It was crushed. The padding had deep indentations, as if someone had been pressing against it from the inside. My hands froze over the fabric. There were scratches, long, jagged, frantic, etched into the wood near the top of the lid. I stumbled back, my breath ragged. No, I whispered to no one. No. My first thought was grave robbers, but there were no signs of forced entry. No footprints except mine. The soil above had been compact, not dug from outside. It didn't make sense. I scrambled for my radio again, still dead. I turned toward the path to run, to find someone, anyone, and that's when I saw them. Footprints. Small. Bare. Leading away from the grave. They glistened faintly in the mud, unmistakably human, spaced unevenly as if whoever left them had been stumbling. The tracks led toward the north grounds, the oldest part of the cemetery, long abandoned. I wanted to believe I was imagining it. That exhaustion and fear were twisting my senses. But the rain hadn't washed them away yet, and as another flash of lightning tore across the sky, I could see them clearly. Ending in the darkness near the old mausoleum, I tightened my grip on the flashlight, swallowed the lump in my throat, and followed. The rain had slowed to a whisper, falling in soft sheets that blurred the world into silver and shadow. My boots sank into the mud as I followed the footprints, each one more uneven than the last, the impressions faintly filled with rainwater, as if the person who left them had only passed minutes ago. My pulse thudded in my ears, louder than the distant thunder. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. Someone dug her out. Someone took her. That would make sense. But nothing about this felt like sense. The north grounds loomed ahead, a forgotten corner of St. Mary's, where no new graves had been dug in years. The trees there grew twisted, roots pushing through the cracked paths like bones under skin. The air was colder, the mist thicker. My flashlight beam flickered, slicing through the fog in shaky bursts. And then I saw it. Movement, just ahead, between two leaning headstones. A figure, small, hunched, draped in white. My heart stuttered. For one suspended moment, I thought I'd found her. Rachel. She was barefoot, her burial gown clinging to her skin, soaked through with rain and streaked with mud. Her hair hung in dark ropes over her face. I took a step forward, breath trembling. Rachel? She didn't answer. She stood still, except for the faint trembling of her shoulders. Then, slowly, she turned her head toward me. The light caught her face. I can't describe it perfectly. It wasn't grotesque, not the horror I'd braced myself for. But there was something wrong in the way her eyes reflected the light. They looked unfocused, like she was seeing something through me. Her lips moved soundlessly, shaping words I couldn't hear over the hiss of rain. And then, just as quickly, she was gone. The figure slipped behind a row of gravestones, vanishing into the fog. I ran, shouting her name, stumbling over roots and stones, the beam of my flashlight darting wildly across marble and mud. I turned the corner. Nothing. Only the slick ground and the silent rows of graves. I spun in circles, gasping, the mist closing in. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw them again. The footprints. The same bare prints leading up to the mausoleum door. They stopped there, perfectly centered before the heavy iron gate that hadn't been opened in years. My hand shook as I reached for it. The handle was ice cold. It shouldn't have opened. Rusted solid, sealed by time. But when I pulled, it gave way with a low groan that echoed through the chamber beyond. Inside, the air was still, cold enough that my breath came out in visible puffs. The scent of wet stone and something older, rot maybe, filled my lungs. My flashlight cut across cracked marble, broken vases, and nameplates long worn smooth, and then I heard it again. That same voice. Faint, but clear this time. It whispered my name. David. Every nerve in my body locked in place. I turned toward the sound, the light trembling in my hands. The voice came again, softer, almost pleading. David. I didn't run. I couldn't. I only stood there, frozen between fear and grief, as the echo of that voice drifted through the dark like a sigh from beneath the stone. Morning came like a lie, sunlight spilling across the cemetery as if the night hadn't happened at all. The storm had washed everything clean. The graves gleamed with dew. The mud that had once held footprints was smooth and untouched. I remember standing there, staring at the patch of ground I'd dug through, half expecting to see the hole again. But the soil was level, undisturbed, as though I'd never touched it. When the police arrived, I tried to explain. I showed them where I'd heard the voice, where I'd seen the footprints, the place by the mausoleum door. They looked at me the way you look at someone you're trying not to upset. They took notes, asked a few polite questions, and finally said they'd check it out. Hours later, one of them came back. Sergeant Heller, a man I'd known for years. He pulled me aside and said quietly, "The grave's sealed, Dave. Coffin's there. Still closed. Still occupied. I didn't understand. I saw it. I opened it. I told him about the scratch marks, the handprints." He shook his head. And we photographed it. Perfectly intact. "You've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe that storm—" I didn't let him finish. For days, the whispers followed me. Not real ones, just echoes in my mind. I kept replaying it, every sound, every flicker of light. I told myself it had to be exhaustion, maybe hallucination, but something deeper wouldn't let go. I started digging, not graves, but information. I went to the town archives, looked up the records for Rachel Turner. The coroner's report said she died in a car accident off Route 19. Her heart had stopped for 10 minutes before paramedics revived her. She'd been comatose for 2 days, then her vitals dropped again. Pronounced deceased at 2:37 p.m. But there were inconsistencies. Some of the attending nurses had noted faint muscle spasms after the declaration, the kind of postmortem reflexes that happen as the body releases energy. I'd seen it before, a twitch, a sigh, even a sound. The human brain is strange at the edge of death. Still, something in those notes chilled me. One nurse wrote, "Patient's pupils unreactive. Minor vocalization during final ECG flatline. Thought it was air expulsion. Vocalization, a sound." My coroner friend, Dr. Lewis, tried to talk me down. He told me about gases building in sealed coffins, about the sounds that can travel through hollow chambers and drainage lines. He said, "You probably heard something real, just not what you think." Maybe he was right, but I couldn't explain how the voice knew my name. I tried to reason it away. Maybe my mind filled in the blanks. Maybe the sound, whatever it was, merged with my own guilt or fear. But at night, when the wind moved through the graves, I'd hear it again, faint and soft. Sometimes it wasn't even a word, just breath. Like someone struggling to speak from the other side of the earth. I'd look toward the north grounds, and for a moment, I'd feel it. That same pulse of air, the same pressure in my chest. And deep down, I wondered if consciousness can fade, return, and flicker between life, and it's been 12 years since that night. The storms still come every spring, and when they do, I always find myself standing by the window, listening. I don't work at St. Mary's anymore. My knees gave out a few years back, and I took it as a sign to finally rest. But I never really left that place. Not in the ways that matter. I visit sometimes. The new groundskeeper, a young kid named Luke, lets me through the gates after hours. He thinks it's strange that I still come by, but he doesn't ask questions. I walk the paths I used to mow, run my hand across the old headstones I once kept clean. There's peace in those quiet hours. Peace I didn't know how to find when I was younger. Rachel Turner's grave is still there, near the edge of the north grounds. The grass grows thicker around it, almost protective. I bring flowers. Not because I knew her, but because I heard her. Because part of me still feels I owe her something. Sometimes, when the wind moves just right, I swear I can still hear that sound. Not a whisper this time, just a breath. Faint, almost tender, like someone exhaling after a long sleep. I've stopped trying to explain it. I think the older you get, the more you realize that not everything in this world is meant to be understood. Some things are just meant to be witnessed, carried, like a burden, or maybe a gift. People ask if working among the dead ever frightened me. The truth is, the living always scared me more. The dead, they keep their secrets. They don't lie, don't pretend, they rest. But that night, the night the silence broke, it changed something in me. I used to believe cemeteries were the end of everything, a final stop. But now I'm not so sure. Maybe they're doorways. Maybe the energy of who we are doesn't vanish. Maybe it lingers, waiting to be remembered. Every time I kneel by Rachel's grave, I say the same thing. You're not forgotten. I don't know if she hears it. I don't even know if she still exists in any form we could recognize. But saying it makes the air feel lighter, like the ground itself exhales. Before I leave, I always turn once more toward the mausoleum. It's quiet now, its walls slick with moss and rain. But sometimes, in that stillness, I think I hear my name again. Soft, fleeting, almost like a thank you. We think of cemeteries as places where life ends. But maybe they're where memory begins. And if memory has weight, then perhaps that's what we carry. The unseen, the unexplainable, the echoes that refuse to fade. So I walk away, the sunrise behind me, the earth calm again. And for the first time, I'm not afraid of what waits beneath. What if some part of her never left?